morning everybody. My name is Vinu Venkatesh and welcome to another class with me on the English language. Today is a very important class because we're going to talk about verbs and the types of verbs and also the importance of verbs in the English sentence. So it's a foundation class for English grammar, and as I always say, grammar and vocabulary are equally important in learning English or any other language. So shall we start? So we're going to talk about verbs today. What are verbs? Okay, verbs are words that refer to or stand for doing or being something. They are action words. They describe the action that the subject is doing. All right. Now, in our class on nouns, we had talked about the structure of the English sentence, correct? We had said that the English sentence generally starts with a subject. A subject can be a noun or a pronoun or a gerund, if you remember, right? Plus, there is a verb. Plus there are other words or objects which can be nouns or pronouns. That gives us the English sentence. All right. We talked about subjects, we talked about nouns, pronouns, gerunds. Now we're going to talk about the verb. The verb tells us the action that the subject is doing. Okay, so that's why verbs are called action words. For example, Sita is a student. Is a verb because it is the verb. It is a form of the verb called to be, meaning is. Sita is a student. Ram was a young boy in 1992, for example. Ram goes to school. Goes is a verb. Why? Because it is telling us what Ram is doing. Okay, Ram is going to school. You can also say is going to school. Ram also goes to school. We'll talk about the types of verbs, the tenses of verbs, and so on shortly. What are the types of verbs? There are mainly two types of verbs called the main verb and the auxiliary verb. What are main verbs? In general, main verbs are all verbs as seen in the dictionary. Okay. For example, we talked about Sita is a student, Ram goes to school. Goes is a main verb, is also a main verb. It describes the action that the subject of the sentence is doing. What is Sita? Sita is a student. What does the second sentence talk about? Second sentence is talking about Ram and school. So what is Ram doing? Ram goes to school. Okay. So there are types now. There are types of main verbs. Before we go to that, let's talk about the different forms that a main verb can take. Okay. Now please note that I've used the abbreviation MV for main verb. Now there are 5 forms that the main verb can take. For example, V1 is called the first form. It refers to all main verbs in their present tense and in the plural form. For example, eat. They eat apples. V2 or the second form talks about main verbs in the past tense with no singular or plural. For example, ate. They ate apples. Okay. V3 is the third form which represent the passive or the perfect participle or the past participle of the main verb with no plural or singular form. For example, eaten. They had eaten apples, or they had eaten a cake yesterday. That is called the passive or the perfect participle. V4 or the fourth form. So fourth form refers to the continuous form of the verb. That is a ing form. Correct? That is a gerund basically, with no singular or plural form of the verb. For example, eating. Eating is the same in the singular as well as plural form. They are eating apples, or he is eating an apple. So eating is a form in the singular as well as a plural, and it is in the continuous form. That is a fourth form. V5 or the fifth form is basically the present tense of the verb, where es is added to the verb to form its present tense, and it is in the singular form. Remember, it is different from V1, which is also talking about the present tense but in the plural form, and there is no es added to form the present tense of the word. For example, eat. Whereas here it is you would say not e, you would say es, or you would say things like passes, he passes the shop every morning. You know, that is the present form with the es as the es or s as the present form of the verb. All right. Okay. Now second, now you also have to note that in case of V4 or fourth form, verbs which end in a vowel plus a consonant, such as refer, e is a vowel and r is a consonant, sorry, then its V4 is obtained by repeating the consonant and adding ing. For example, referring, you add the consonant r plus ing. Now moving on to the next footnote, for verbs which end in two vowels such as eat plus a consonant, then its V4 is obtained by adding simply ing to the verb. For example, eat becomes eating, and not like referring. You don't add another T plus ing. You simply add ing because the verb is ending in two vowels and a consonant. Okay, just keep that in mind because it will help you to decide how to get the V4 form of a particular verb. All right. Now, two other types of main verbs are regular verb. Regular verb is a verb where we add ed at the end to get the V2 and V3. For example, play becomes played. All right. What is played? V2 and V3. V2 is basically the past form with no singular and plural. So played, is it past? Yes. He played the game. They played the game. So regardless of whether the subject is singular or plural, played remains played, and therefore it is a V2 form. It is a regular verb because we have added ed to the verb play in order to get the V2 form. In V3 also, for example, where we talk about the passive or the perfect participle or the past participle, let's say the V3 form of the verb play is also played. They had played the game. All right, he had played the game. So whether the subject is singular or the plural, V3 of play remains played. So what are irregular verbs? Irregular verb is every other type of word that is verb where we don't add ed to get the V2 and the V3. For example, eat. The past tense of eat is ate, and the past perfect participle is, or the passive form of eat is eaten, as we already saw. Remember, we are still on main verbs. We first talked about the forms of the main verbs, V1 to V5. All right. Then we talked about regular verb and irregular verb, which are also forms of the main verb. Okay. Now, what are the types of main verbs? There are four types of main verbs. The first type is called the finite verb. What are finite verbs? Finite verbs are verbs that have a subject. That is, they are verbs of the type V1. All right. What is V1 again? V1 is the present tense verb and it is in the plural form. For example, they eat apples. Okay, correct. They eat apples. It is in the present tense and it is in the plural. All right. What are infinite verbs? Infinite verbs are in the infinitive, that is in the to plus verb form, ing form, or in the ed form. These verbs don't have a tense and these are verbs of the type V2, V3 and V4. For example, we talked about played, right? Played and what is V4? Continuous, playing, okay? So, where are we? Yeah, infinite verbs, okay? What are transitive verbs? Transitive verbs are verbs that make sense if they exert action on objects. Objects are persons or things which are affected by the actions of the verbs. For example, write your name here. So write is a transitive verb and object is your name, okay? Ram loved the dog, all right? Ram is a subject, loved is a transitive verb, it is a main verb, and dog is the object. Means these are verbs where we can use these verbs in sentences only if those sentences have objects. Okay. For example, the boy kicked the dog, which is a very bad thing to do. Please don't do this. But the boy is a subject. Kicked is the transitive verb. It is the main verb, and the dog is the object. What are intransitive verbs? Intransitive verbs are verbs which don't require to exert action on objects to them to become meaningful. Means they are used in sentences where there are no objects. For example, Kevin couldn't read or write. Kevin is a subject. Word couldn't is an auxiliary verb. Read or write is the main verb or the intransitive verb. Is there an object? No. Kevin couldn't read or write what? We don't know. So there is no object here. It simply says that Kevin could not read or write. Auxiliary verbs we'll be discussing very shortly. Okay, let's look at the second example. The baby was crying. Is there an object in the sentence? Absolutely not. There is a subject called baby. Was again is an auxiliary verb, and crying is the main verb or the intransitive verb. So what are auxiliary verbs? Auxiliary verbs are nothing but, helping verbs. Okay, auxiliary verbs or AVs, the short form, are used in sentences along with the main verbs and are not used by themselves. We'll see how. Okay, they are used in a sentence to convey the mood, tense and voice of a sentence. They're used when sentences are written in passive voice. Okay, now what are the types of auxiliary verbs? There are three main types: prime auxiliary verbs, modal auxiliary verbs and semi-modal auxiliary verbs. Prime auxiliary verbs are of mainly three categories: to be and all of its versions, that is, am, are, was, were, be, been and being. To have, that is, has, have, had. To do, that is, do, does and did. Those are prime auxiliary verbs. Modal auxiliary verbs are basically will, can, could, shall, should, would, may, might, must, ought to and ought to. Alright. Semi-modal auxiliary verbs are basically three: used to, dare and need. Alright. Let's take a look at how we use auxiliary verbs in sentences. For example, so a mango is eaten by me. This sentence is in passive voice. Why? Because me is actually the subject, but it is put in the place of the object. Mango is the object, but it is put in the place of the subject. Eat is eaten is the verb. Alright. Now is, as we studied, forms is an auxiliary verb. Okay, it is not used by itself, it is used along with the main verb eaten. So is a prime auxiliary verb, and eaten is what form of the main verb? It is in the passive form, or V3. Okay, so that's how you identify what is an auxiliary verb and what is a main verb and what is a form of the main verb. Alright, I eat a mango. Is there an auxiliary verb here? Check the list. No, it's only eat. Eat is the main verb. And what kind of main verb is it? It is the V1 form. That is, it is, I beg your pardon, it is the, it is the, well, V1, not really, because we're talking about the first person. So eat here is in the singular form and it is in the present tense. So it's actually, you cannot say it is V1, but it is just a main verb. Alright, think of it that way. I am eating. Now here again there is an auxiliary verb am. It is a prime auxiliary verb. Alright. Now eating is what form of the verb? Eating is a main verb of the form V4. Right? It is in the continuous form with no singular or plural form, such as eating. Got it? So that brings us to the end of the class today. So what did we discuss today? We talked about what verbs are. Verbs are action words. They describe the action that the subject is doing. Alright? They form an integral part of the English sentence. They are mainly of two types: main verbs as well as auxiliary verbs. Now main verbs take 5 forms, V1 to V5. There are regular main verbs as well as irregular main verbs. We also have finite main verbs, infinite main verbs, transitive main verbs and intransitive main verbs. Then we come to auxiliary verbs. Auxiliary verbs are not used by themselves. They are used only along with the main verbs in a sentence with a passive voice. So they are verbs like is and forms of is, verbs like to be and forms of to be, to have, to do, will, can, should, would, may, might, must, ought to, and semi-modal auxiliary verbs such as used to, dare and need. Please keep this in mind because it's very important to identify what kind of a verb is being used in a sentence, what is an auxiliary verb, what is the main verb, what form of the main verb, and what type of the main verb we are using. So it's a very critical lesson for English grammar. Please let me know if you have any questions or comments in the comment box. I'd be happy to go through that with you. I really hope you found this useful, and I look forward to meeting you again in my next class. Until then, wish you all the best and have a nice day. Bye-bye.